Why did a cowboy who came to claim his mail-order bride suddenly go silent when the woman at the train station said, "I'm not the one you were expecting"? The church had gone completely still. Snowmelt dripped from a boot near the front pew. Garrett Hayes stood frozen in the aisle, a worn gold ring resting in his open palm. Across from him, Loretta Brooks pressed trembling fingers against her lips as dozens of townspeople watched without a sound. Then someone near the back quietly whispered a name that changed the room, and Garrett's eyes shifted toward the door. "Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and whether you would have stayed or walked away." The last train of the season rolled into Red Rock Junction beneath a sky the color of worn copper. Dust drifted across the tracks as the locomotive slowed with a long hiss. A handful of townsfolk stood near the platform, watching more for entertainment than necessity. In a place like Red Rock Junction, anything unexpected became news before supper. Garrett Hayes stood apart from the crowd, 41 years old, broad-shouldered, quiet. His hat shaded his eyes as he held a photograph that had already begun to soften at the corners from months of handling. 8 months of letters. 8 months of careful words exchanged with a woman he had never met. The woman in the photograph had light hair pinned neatly beneath a bonnet. The woman who stepped off the train was not her. She was tall and carried a weathered suitcase with both hands. Her dark traveling dress showed the dust of a journey stretching halfway across the country. For a moment, she simply stood there, scanning the platform until her eyes found Garrett. Then she walked toward him. The noise around the station seemed to fade. Garrett looked from the photograph to the woman approaching him. She stopped a few feet away. A gust of wind tugged at loose strands of hair near her face. "I'm not who you ordered," she said. Silence spread across the platform. Someone near the freight wagon laughed. Garrett blinked once. "What?" The woman swallowed. "My name is Loretta Brooks." The suitcase handle creaked in her grip. "My sister was supposed to come." More people began listening openly now. A ranch hand leaned against a post. A store clerk stepped out onto the boardwalk. Even the station master slowed his work. Loretta looked exhausted. Not frightened. Not weak. Just tired. 3 days before the train left St. Louis, she disappeared, Loretta said. The agency said if nobody came, they'd keep every dollar that had already been paid. Garrett's jaw tightened. "The agency sent you instead?" She nodded once. "They told me to explain after I arrived." A low whistle came from somewhere behind them, then another laugh. "That's rich." The cowboy ordered one bride and got another. More laughter followed. Garrett did not turn around. Across the street, Clara Finch stepped out from her fabric shop and watched the scene unfold. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly. She had spent years believing she would someday become the lady of Silver Creek Ranch. Now fate had delivered her a spectacle. Loretta lowered her eyes briefly. Only briefly. When she looked back up, there was dignity there. "I understand if you want me back on the train," she said. "I never wanted to deceive anyone." Garrett studied her face. There was no performance in it, no manipulation, just a woman carrying a burden that clearly wasn't of her making. The conductor called for final boarding. The train would leave again within minutes. Loretta glanced toward it. The sound of metal wheels echoed softly down the tracks. She looked as though she already expected the answer. Garrett folded the photograph and slipped it into his coat pocket. The crowd waited. Clara waited. Loretta waited. Finally, Garrett spoke. "Do you know where your sister went?" "No." "Do you have anyone in Montana?" "No." The train whistle blew again. A long, lonely sound across the prairie. Garrett looked toward the distant hills beyond town, then back at Loretta. "Until we know what happened," he said, "you stay at Silver Creek." The crowd fell silent. Loretta stared at him. For the first time since stepping off the train, uncertainty crossed her face. You don't have to do that. I know. The train began moving, slowly at first, then faster. Loretta watched it leave, watched her last easy way home disappear around a bend of red earth and sagebrush. When she turned back, Garrett had already picked up her suitcase. Silver Creek's 10 miles north, he said. The autumn wind moved through the station. Neither of them smiled. Neither understood how much had just changed. Across the street, Clara Finch watched Garrett walk away beside the woman who was never supposed to arrive. And in that moment, she decided Loretta Brooks would never be welcome in Red Rock Junction. The sun slipped lower over the Montana prairie as Garrett led his horse toward the road home. Loretta followed beside him. Behind them, the town kept watching. Ahead of them, Silver Creek Ranch waited beneath the distant Bitterroot Mountains, and neither of them knew that the wrong woman on the train would soon become the center of everything. The ride north took nearly 2 hours. The road wound through open prairie where dry grass bent beneath the autumn wind. Cottonwoods lined portions of the creek, their leaves already turning gold. Every so often, Garrett pointed out a landmark without saying much else. That's Miller's Crossing. A mile later, old trading post used to stand there. Loretta nodded each time. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. As the sun settled lower, Silver Creek Ranch finally appeared. A long fence stretched across the valley floor. Beyond it stood a large barn painted dark red, several corrals, a blacksmith shed, and a 2-story ranch house with white trim worn soft by years of weather. Smoke rose from the chimney. Warm light glowed from the windows. Loretta looked at it quietly. It was larger than any place she had ever lived. Garrett dismounted first. Before she could reach for her suitcase, he had already lifted it from the wagon. The front door opened. An older woman stepped onto the porch. Gray hair, strong posture, eyes that noticed everything. Esther Bell. She looked from Garrett to Loretta, then back again. That wasn't the woman from the photograph. Garrett rubbed the back of his neck. No. Esther waited. Garrett offered nothing more. The older woman sighed. Well, standing in the yard won't explain anything. To Loretta's surprise, Esther walked down the steps and held out her hand. I'm Esther Bell. Loretta took it. Loretta Brooks. Esther squeezed once. Firm, welcoming. No questions, no judgment. Only a simple gesture that made something loosen slightly inside Loretta's chest. That evening, they ate supper at a long wooden table near the kitchen. Beef stew, cornbread, black coffee. A lantern hanging above the table cast warm circles of light over the room. Garrett explained the situation as simply as possible. Esther listened. When he finished, she set down her spoon. So the girl disappeared. Looks that way, and nobody knows where. No. Esther looked at Loretta. You got family back home? Loretta shook her head. Only my sister. The older woman nodded slowly. Then she returned to eating. The conversation moved on. Just like that. No interrogation. No pity. Later that night, Esther showed Loretta to a small bedroom overlooking the eastern pasture. A quilt lay folded neatly at the foot of the bed. A pitcher of water sat beside a wash basin. Outside, cattle moved like shadows beneath moonlight. It's not fancy, Esther said. It's beautiful. The older woman smiled. I'll take that as a compliment. After Esther left, Loretta sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time since leaving St. Louis, she allowed herself to breathe. Not deeply, not completely, but enough. The next morning began before sunrise. Silver Creek woke early. Cowboys moved through the yard carrying feed buckets. Horses stamped in the corrals. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Loretta found Esther already working over a cast-iron stove. What time do people usually eat? 5. Loretta blinked. In the morning? Esther laughed. You'll fit in fine. Within a week, Loretta had found a rhythm. She wasn't a guest. That didn't suit her. Instead, she worked. She inventoried sacks of flour, checked winter supplies, sorted receipts stored inside a wooden box near the pantry. One afternoon, she discovered numbers that didn't match. 3 purchases of cattle feed had been recorded. Only 2 deliveries had arrived. She checked again, then a third time. The totals were wrong. That evening, she approached Garrett while he repaired a broken harness outside the barn. He listened while she explained. The setting sun caught the dust floating between them. You sure? Loretta handed him the ledger. The receipts say one thing. She pointed. The inventory says another. Garrett studied the pages. His expression slowly changed. Not anger. Recognition. That's almost $200. Loretta nodded. I know. The next day, Garrett confronted the former ranch manager who had recently left Silver Creek. By supper, the missing money had been repaid. No one celebrated. But when Garrett sat down at the table that night, he quietly slid a small envelope toward Loretta. She looked inside. $20. Her eyes widened. I can't take this. Yes, you can. For checking numbers? For saving me from losing more. Loretta stared at the envelope. No one had ever paid her for noticing things before. Most people simply expected it. Garrett returned to his meal. The conversation ended there, but something had shifted. A few days later, another problem arrived. A mare near foaling went into distress. The animal paced the stall restlessly while Esther worked beside her. Loretta rolled up her sleeves and helped without hesitation. Lantern light flickered against rough wooden walls. Hours passed. Cold air slipped through cracks in the barn. Finally, just before dawn, a healthy foal struggled onto shaky legs. The mare lowered her head and nudged it gently. Esther wiped her forehead. You've done this before. A few times. Esther looked at her. You're useful in ways people don't see right away. Loretta looked toward the rising sun beyond the barn door. Most people don't wait long enough to find out. Neither woman said anything after that. Across the yard, Garrett stood near the fence. He had watched more of the night than either of them realized. The wind carried the sound of the newborn foal finding its feet. Loretta brushed straw from her sleeves. For a brief moment, Garrett's eyes met hers. No words passed between them. Yet the look lasted longer than before. Not because either wanted it to, because neither looked away first. And somewhere beyond the ranch fences, Clara Finch was already telling anyone willing to listen that the strange woman from the train was trying to make herself comfortable at Silver Creek Ranch. The rumors had begun, and they were only getting started. By the time the first snow appeared on the higher ridges of the Bitterroot Mountains, nearly everyone in Red Rock Junction had formed an opinion about Loretta Brooks. Most of them had never spoken more than 3 words to her. Yet they spoke about her often. Loretta learned to recognize the silence that followed when she entered the general store. The pause at church when people noticed where she chose to sit. The curious glances that lingered a little too long. She never complained. Instead, she kept working. The ranch gave her enough to think about. Winter was coming. Feed inventories had to be checked. Coffee beans had to be ordered before the roads became difficult. Lantern oil, flour, salt, horse medicine, nails. Everything had to be counted. One cold afternoon, Garrett returned from town, carrying a stack of receipts and a sack of mail. Loretta sat at the kitchen table balancing numbers in the ledger. A kerosene lamp glowed beside her. You missed supper. She looked up, so did you. A corner of Garrett's mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. He set the mail on the table. Anything important? Loretta shuffled through the envelopes. Mostly invoices. Then her hand stopped. An envelope from St. Louis. Her heart tightened. She opened it immediately. The letter contained no news of her sister. Only another unanswered inquiry returned by the agency. The same dead end. The same silence. Garrett watched her fold the paper carefully. He didn't ask questions. Some disappointments didn't need witnesses. 3 days later, winter arrived all at once. The sky darkened before noon. Wind swept down from the mountains carrying sharp needles of snow. Cowboys rushed to move horses into sheltered corrals. Barn doors slammed. Loose equipment disappeared beneath tarps. By mid-afternoon, visibility had dropped to less than 50 yards. Garrett stood in the barn doorway studying the storm. "We still have 6 horses in the north pasture. I'll help." He looked at Loretta. "You don't have to. I'm already wearing boots." That ended the discussion. An hour later, they rode through blowing snow toward the North Valley. The world had vanished into white. Fence posts appeared and disappeared like ghosts. The wind howled across the open ground. By the time they found the missing horses, darkness was already creeping across the valley. Returning to Silver Creek became impossible. The storm had erased the trail. Garrett pointed toward an old line shack used by cowboys during bad weather. The small cabin stood beside a frozen creek. Inside, they found a wood stove, 2 narrow bunks, and enough dry wood to last the night. Garrett built a fire. Loretta filled a dented coffee pot from a water barrel. Neither complained. Out here, storms didn't care about plans. The fire crackled softly. Outside, snow struck the walls in steady waves. For a long time, they sat quietly drinking coffee from tin cups. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and wet wool. Eventually, Garrett spoke. "My fiancé died 8 years ago." Loretta looked up. He was staring into the fire. "I never asked what happened. Most people don't." The flames shifted. Influenza. The word hung quietly between them. After that, I stopped thinking much about the future. Loretta lowered her eyes. The coffee had already gone cold. "My mother used to say, loneliness becomes furniture if you leave it in the room long enough." Garrett looked at her. She shrugged lightly. "I think she was right." The wind rattled the cabin. Neither laughed, yet neither looked away. For the first time, the distance between them felt smaller than the width of the room. The next morning, the storm weakened. By afternoon, they reached Red Rock Junction. What waited for them was not peace. Deputy Hank Mercer was already at Silver Creek. Snow clung to his coat shoulders. His expression told Garrett immediately that something was wrong. "I found something." They moved into Garrett's office. Loretta followed. Hank removed a worn folder from his saddlebag. "I've been digging through old territorial records." He opened the file. Several names appeared on the pages. Contracts. Employment agreements. Transportation records. Then Loretta saw it. Her sister's name. Her breathing stopped. Hank tapped the document. She never ran away. The room became very still. An agent working for Amos Grady transferred her contract. Loretta stared at the paper. Transferred where? Hank hesitated. To a mining camp in Idaho. The words struck harder than any storm. Loretta lowered herself slowly into a chair. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. All this time, she had believed her sister chose to leave. All this time, she had blamed her. Now another possibility stood before her. Maybe her sister had never been given a choice at all. Garrett moved closer. Not enough to crowd her. Just enough that she wasn't facing the news alone. "We'll find her." Loretta looked down at the file. The handwriting blurred. "You don't know that, no." His voice remained steady. "But we'll try." Outside the office window, snow drifted from the ranch roof. Inside, something larger than rumors had entered their lives. And across town, Clara Finch had already begun noticing how often Garrett Hayes stood beside Loretta Brooks. For Clara, that was a problem, and she intended to do something about it. Winter settled deeper over Red Rock Junction. Snow remained in the shadows beside buildings. Wagon wheels left frozen tracks along Main Street. Smoke curled from chimneys and drifted across the cold morning air. Inside Silver Creek Ranch, life continued. Cattle still needed feed. Horses still needed care. Ledgers still needed balancing. Yet something had changed. Garrett found himself looking toward the kitchen whenever he entered the house, toward the table where Loretta usually worked, toward the window where she often sat with a pencil tucked behind one ear while reviewing receipts. He never said much about it. But Esther noticed. Esther noticed everything. One evening she set a plate of biscuits on the table and looked at Garrett over her spectacles. "You're staring at that empty chair again." Garrett glanced down. "I wasn't." "You were." The older woman returned to her cooking. Neither mentioned it again. A week later, Judge Walter Pike arrived at the ranch carrying a leather document case. Snow covered the shoulders of his black coat. He spent nearly 2 hours with Garrett and Deputy Hank inside the office. Loretta stayed away. When the door finally opened, she saw tension written across every face. Judge Pike removed a folded paper from his case. "We found enough records to connect Amos Grady to multiple fraudulent contracts." Hank nodded. Some of those girls never knew where they were being sent. Loretta felt the room grow still. "And my sister?" "We're getting closer." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the first real hope she had received in months. That night, she stood alone on the porch. The sky was clear. Thousands of stars hung above the valley. Snow glittered beneath moonlight. The front door opened behind her. Garrett stepped outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her. She accepted it quietly. Steam rose between them. For a while they watched the dark fields without speaking. Then Garrett finally said, "We're going to find her." Loretta stared into the distance. "You keep saying that, because I mean it." She looked at him. His face remained calm, certain, the kind of certainty she had rarely seen in anyone, especially when the problem belonged to someone else. For a moment, she almost believed everything might work out. Then Sunday arrived, and with it came Clara Finch. The church at Red Rock Junction stood beside a grove of cottonwoods near the creek. The wooden pews were full that morning. People removed gloves and winter coats as they settled in. Loretta entered quietly and found a seat near the back. Several conversations stopped. Others lowered into whispers. She was becoming used to that. Halfway through the service, Clara approached a group of women near the entrance. She spoke softly, too softly to hear, yet not so softly that people failed to notice. One whisper became 2. 2 became 6. By the end of the service, the entire room seemed to carry the same story. Loretta heard pieces of it as she walked outside. "She's after the ranch. Poor Garrett doesn't even see it. Funny how she arrived with nothing and now lives at Silver Creek." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Sometimes quiet cruelty traveled farther. Loretta kept walking. Her boots crunched through snow. She never looked back. The rumors spread quickly after that. Customers discussed them inside the mercantile. Cowboys repeated them near the feed store. Even some hands at Silver Creek began asking questions when they thought Garrett wasn't listening. One afternoon, Loretta entered the barn and heard 2 ranch workers speaking near a stall. Their voices dropped when they saw her, but not fast enough. Maybe Clara's right. Could be. Loretta turned around before either man noticed the hurt crossing her face. She finished her work, served supper, balanced accounts, folded laundry. Nothing changed on the outside. Everything changed inside. Late that night, she sat alone in her room. A lantern burned low on the dresser. The ledger books sat stacked neatly beside the wall. She looked around the small room. The quilt Esther had given her. The window overlooking the pasture. The chair Garrett repaired after one leg broke. For the first time since arriving, it felt like home. That realization hurt more than the rumors. Slowly, she opened her suitcase, folded her dresses, packed her belongings, placed every ranch document in perfect order. When she finished, she wrote a letter. Just one page, simple, honest, no accusations, no complaints, only gratitude. Before sunrise, she carried the completed ledgers to Garrett's office. She left the storage keys beside them. Then she placed the letter on the top. The ranch was still asleep when she walked away. Snow fell lightly from a gray sky. No one saw her leave. Not Esther, not Hank, not Garrett. Especially not Garrett. He returned that afternoon from a trip with Judge Pike and Deputy Hank. His horse was tired. His coat carried road dust and melting snow. The first thing he noticed was the silence. The second was the letter waiting on his desk. Garrett stood motionless as he read it. The room seemed smaller afterward. The chair beside the window was empty. The kitchen table was empty. The guest room upstairs was empty. Everywhere he looked, something was missing. He folded the letter slowly, then read it again. For a long time, he remained alone in the office. The winter sun faded beyond the ranch windows. Outside, cattle moved through the snow-covered pasture. Inside, Garrett finally admitted a truth he had avoided for months. He wasn't afraid of losing the woman who arrived on the wrong train. He was afraid of losing Loretta Brooks. And by the time he understood it, she was already gone. The next morning, Garrett saddled his horse before sunrise. The ranch yard lay silent beneath fresh snow. Frost covered the fence rails. A pale gray light stretched across the valley. Deputy Hank Mercer was already waiting near the gate. "You look terrible," Hank said. Garrett mounted without answering. Hank nodded. "That's about what I expected." For the next 2 weeks, they followed every lead they could find. Most of them went nowhere. One clerk remembered seeing Amos Grady's name. Another remembered transportation records. A station agent found an old shipping ledger buried beneath stacks of forgotten paperwork. Slowly, the pieces came together. A trail emerged. Not toward St. Louis. Toward Idaho. Toward a mining settlement where labor contracts had been sold through middlemen and brokers. One freezing afternoon, they found the final document, a transfer record bearing Loretta's sister's signature. Or rather, a signature someone had written for her. Judge Walter Pike studied it beneath lamplight. His expression hardened. This wasn't voluntary. The room fell silent. Garrett stared at the paper. For months, Loretta had carried guilt that was never hers. And now there was proof. 3 days later, Deputy Hank located Loretta's sister living in a boarding house near a mining camp outside Boise. Alive. Exhausted. But alive. The news traveled back to Montana faster than winter storms. At the same time, Judge Pike filed charges against Amos Grady. Records surfaced. Contracts surfaced. Witnesses surfaced. The carefully hidden scheme began collapsing under its own weight. By the end of the month, Amos Grady was in custody awaiting a territorial hearing. The town buzzed with conversation. Some people acted shocked. Others claimed they had suspected something all along. Garrett ignored all of them. He had only one concern: finding Loretta. They eventually located her working at a small boarding house west of Red Rock Junction. She had rented a narrow room above the kitchen. Nothing fancy. A bed, a wash basin, a single window overlooking the snowy road. When Garrett stepped through the front door, Loretta froze. For a moment, neither moved. The woman carrying dishes nearby quietly disappeared into the back room, giving them space. Garrett removed his hat. "Loretta." She looked down, then back up. "You found my sister." The words were barely above a whisper. Garrett nodded. "She's safe." Loretta closed her eyes. A long breath escaped her. Relief. The kind that comes after carrying a stone for too long. When she opened her eyes again, they were shining. "Thank you." Garrett stepped forward. Not close enough to corner her. Just close enough to be honest. "You should have let me explain." Loretta lowered her gaze. The town had already decided who I was. I hadn't. Silence settled between them. Outside, a wagon rolled past on frozen wheels. The sound faded slowly. I read your letter every day, Garrett said. Loretta looked at him then. Really looked at him. For the first time since leaving. And something inside her softened. A week later, the hearing took place at the church in Red Rock Junction. Every pew was full. Farmers, shopkeepers, ranch hands, families. Everyone wanted to hear the outcome. Judge Pike presented the documents. Deputy Hank testified. Loretta's sister spoke quietly but clearly. The truth emerged piece by piece. By the end, no doubt remained. Amos Grady had built his business on deception, and Loretta had never been part of the scheme. Across the aisle, Clara Finch sat rigidly. The confidence she carried for months had disappeared. She expected Garrett to end the matter politely and return to his old life. Instead, he stood. The church grew still. Even the stove seemed quieter. Garrett walked down the center aisle, past ranchers, past merchants, past Clara. He stopped directly in front of Loretta. The entire church watched. No one whispered. No one moved. Garrett looked at her the same way he had looked at her that first day at the train station. Only now there was no uncertainty left. You were never the wrong woman. The words hung in the air. Simple, clear, true. Loretta felt her throat tighten. Garrett reached into his coat pocket. Slowly, he opened his hand. A small gold ring rested in his palm, worn smooth by time. My mother wore this for 30 years. His voice remained steady. I've carried it for a long time. The church remained silent. No one wanted to interrupt the moment. Garrett took a breath, then another. Loretta Brooks. For the first time in years, the quiet cowboy seemed nervous. Will you marry me? Tears slipped down Loretta's cheeks before she could stop them. Not because she was hurt. Not because she was afraid. Because all her life she had watched other people be chosen first. And now, before the entire town, someone had chosen her. There was no hesitation. Yes. A smile spread across Garrett's face. Small, real, enough to transform him completely. The church erupted into applause. Even people who had doubted her stood. Even Esther Bell wiped her eyes. Outside, church bells rang across the snowy valley. The wedding took place at Silver Creek Ranch in early spring. Snowmelt filled the creek. Wildflowers pushed through the grass. Friends gathered beneath a clear Montana sky. Nothing extravagant. Nothing unnecessary. Just family. Community. And two people who had finally stopped standing apart from their own happiness. 10 years later, travelers entering Red Rock Junction often stopped at a welcoming building near the road. A wooden sign swung gently above the porch. Silver Lantern House. Inside, warm soup simmered on the stove. Fresh bread cooled on wooden racks. Tired travelers found clean beds. Women traveling alone found safety. Working men found hot meals. Above the doorway hung another sign. A hot meal before questions. One rainy afternoon, a young woman stepped through the door, carrying everything she owned in a worn canvas bag. She looked nervous, hungry, unsure. Loretta walked over with the same calm dignity she had carried all those years ago. Without asking anything, she placed a bowl of soup and a slice of bread in front of the young woman. Eat first. The young woman smiled through grateful eyes. Across the room, Garrett stood near the window. Gray touched his hair now, but his eyes were unchanged. Loretta glanced toward him. He smiled. She smiled back. For a moment, the years seemed to fold together. The train station, the dusty platform, the old suitcase, the woman who wasn't supposed to arrive. Garrett looked around the room they had built together, at the people being fed, at the warmth filling the building, at Loretta. Then he remembered the words she had spoken the day they met. "I'm not who you ordered." No. She hadn't been. She had been something far better. Not the woman from the photograph. Not the woman from the letters. The right woman. The woman who turned a ranch into a home. The woman who stayed in his heart long before she stayed in his house. Outside, evening settled over Montana. Lanterns glowed along the porch. Inside, laughter rose softly through the room. And in the golden light of Silver Lantern House, Garrett Hayes and Loretta Brooks sat side by side, grateful for a mistake that had changed both their lives forever. As the lanterns glowed against the gathering Montana dusk, it became hard not to think about how differently their lives could have unfolded. One missed train. One decision at a station platform. One moment when a man chose kindness over pride. Imagine standing where Loretta once stood, far from home, carrying more questions than answers, unsure whether anyone would ever choose you first. Or imagine being Garrett, believing a chapter of your life had already closed, only to discover that hope sometimes arrives wearing a different face than the one you expected. Maybe that's what stays with us after stories like this. Not the ranch, not the ring, not even the wedding. It's the reminder that some of the most meaningful things in life begin when plans fall apart. A second chance doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, asking only that we keep our hearts open long enough to recognize it. If this story touched you, I'd love to know your thoughts. Tell me in the comments, do you believe the best things in life are found? Or are they often the things we never planned for? And if you enjoy stories about love, resilience, healing, and the unexpected turns that lead people home, I hope you'll stay a little longer and join us for the next journey. There are many more heartfelt stories waiting just beyond the next trail, and I'd be honored to share them with you.